Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I find where sounds come from. That's the work, boiled down. The longer version is that I am an acoustic consultant, independent, 18 years in. When a building vibrates for no clear reason. When a neighborhood full of people can't sleep because of something they can hear but can't locate. When a company needs to prove that the noise complaint from the property next door has a source that isn't their equipment, they call someone like me. I come out with my instruments. I map the sound. I find where it's coming from. I write a report. The work is methodical and it suits me because I'm methodical by nature. I don't have a partner or an assistant. I work alone out of a home office in Western Massachusetts, and I drive to jobs across New England in a truck that's been loaded with the same core equipment for so long that I'd notice if a single case were missing. My name is Dex Calloway. I'm 44 years old, and I've been doing this long enough that almost nothing surprises me about the sounds people can't locate. I found an underground gas main that was humming through the foundations of a whole neighborhood for 6 years before anyone thought to call me. I've found a factory fan with a single damaged bearing creating a resonance that traveled 6 blocks and rattled windows in houses whose owners were convinced the problem was geological. I found a pocket of trapped methane venting slowly through a limestone formation beneath a small town in New Hampshire that had spent 3 years convinced the sound was coming from some piece of infrastructure they hadn't identified yet. I showed them the source on a topographic map. They were relieved in the way people are relieved when a strange thing turns out to be an explainable thing. The explainable thing is always there. That's the foundational truth of my professional life. Sound comes from somewhere. It travels through a medium. It has a point of origin and a direction and a frequency that instruments can measure and a cause that a methodical person can find if they look carefully enough and run the right tests. I have never failed to find the source. I want to say that clearly before I say anything else, because everything that follows is going to sound like the work of a person who doesn't know what they're doing. And I need you to understand that I know exactly what I'm doing. I've known what I'm doing for 18 years. The problem is not my methodology. The problem is what I found when I used it. The call came from a woman named Cleo Marsh, the select board chair for a small town in central Vermont called Ardmore. Population just under 60, spread across a quiet valley between 2 low-wooded ridges. She was direct on the phone and tired in the way of someone who's been managing a problem that keeps not getting solved. She told me there'd been low hum complaints in town for about 14 months. She told me 2 other consultants had come out, spent a few days each, found nothing, and left. She told me she was calling me because my name had come up as someone who took harder cases. I told her I'd come. I drove up on a grey Tuesday and met Cleo at the town hall, a small white building on the main road that also served as the library and the community meeting space, and apparently the unofficial headquarters of the hum complaint effort. She had a folder of resident statements she'd compiled, and she walked me through the basics while I drank bad coffee from a machine in the corner. About a third of the residents heard it clearly, Another third described feeling something rather than hearing it, a pressure or vibration in the chest that they couldn't locate. The final third reported nothing at all. The people who heard it described it consistently, regardless of where in the valley they lived. Low, constant, felt in the chest as much as heard with the ears. Not painful and not loud, more like the refrigerator hum in a quiet house at 2 in the morning. The kind of thing that's easy to tune out until one night you can't tune it out anymore, and then you can never fully tune it out again. It didn't correlate with time of day or weather or season. It didn't get louder near any particular building or infrastructure. The 2 previous consultants had checked the obvious candidates: the water treatment facility at the edge of town, the electrical substation, a dairy operation with industrial refrigeration equipment. All of them had been eliminated. She'd been told both times that there was no identifiable source, which she already knew and didn't help her. I told her I needed access to a central workspace and permission to place monitoring equipment across the valley, and she gave me both without asking many questions. I appreciated that. Some clients need to be involved in every step, and it slows the work. That first night, I placed 12 infrasound detectors at distributed locations across the valley, established my spectrum baseline, and sat in the town hall watching the readouts on my laptop. The hum was there, clean and clear in the data. Frequency sitting in the lower infrasound range, well below what most people consciously hear with their ears, which explained why some residents felt it as a physical sensation rather than a sound. The ones who reported hearing it clearly were almost certainly picking up a harmonic, an overtone riding just above the threshold where infrasound becomes audible. This is common with low-frequency industrial sources. The fundamental frequency is below hearing, but the overtones are not. I had the frequency, I had the amplitude, I had 12 detectors placed across a well-mapped valley. By the end of day 2, I'd normally have a source location triangulated to within a few hundred feet. I did not find a source by the end of day 2. Let me explain the methodology, because it matters to understanding what went wrong. When you have a sound at a known frequency and you want to find its source, you map the intensity of the sound at multiple locations. Sound radiates from a source and loses energy as it travels, which means it's louder close to the source and quieter further away. You take intensity readings at enough locations across your survey area, you map the variation, and the source sits at the center of the highest readings. It's not complicated. The physics are as fundamental as anything in acoustics. I produced an intensity map for the Ardmore Valley on the morning of day 2, and I looked at it for a long time. There was no center. The hum registered at the same amplitude at every detector location. Not approximately the same, not within the margin of error I'd normally accept. Exactly the same, to a degree of precision that my equipment was actually capable of distinguishing. Across the valley floor, up on the ridgelines, at the edge of town, in the middle of it, 12 locations, 12 identical readings. I recalibrated every detector. I ran the equipment's self-check sequences, and they all passed. I repositioned 2 detectors to confirm they weren't sitting in some unusual acoustic shadow that was artificially equalizing the readings. Same result every time. I moved to phase analysis, which is a more sophisticated approach that looks at timing rather than volume. Sound waves have peaks and troughs, and the moment a peak arrives at each detector tells you which direction the sound is traveling from. You take the arrival timing at multiple locations and you work backward to the source. It's more computationally intensive than intensity mapping, but it works even in cases where the intensity data is ambiguous. My phase analysis returned an impossible result. The sound wasn't arriving from any direction. It wasn't arriving at all, in the technical sense. For a sound to arrive at a location, it has to travel to that location, which means it has to be at adjacent locations first, which means there's a measurable difference in when the wavefront reaches different points in space. The phase data for Ardmore's hum showed no such difference. The wave was present at every detector simultaneously, not within a millisecond, simultaneously, down to the resolution limit of my equipment, which was fine enough to detect the difference in travel time between points 6 feet apart. I sat with my laptop open to that analysis for a while, and then I wrote in my field notes that the hum appeared to be originating from everywhere simultaneously, and then I stared at what I'd written. I switched to ground vibration monitoring. If the source was underground and coupling into the air from below rather than radiating through it, the air-based phase analysis might miss it, but the ground data would show direction of travel through the substrate. I pulled out my ground monitors and placed them across the valley. They picked up the hum clearly. Same frequency, same amplitude. I ran the phase analysis. On the ground data, same result. No direction, no source point. Uniform simultaneous presence at every monitoring location. On the morning of day 3, I drove up to the ridgeline north of the valley, set up my equipment in a pull-off on a logging road, and took readings. The hum was there. Same frequency, same amplitude, same behavior. I drove to the next valley over, which had no hum complaints, and took readings in a field off the main road. The hum was there. I drove 2 towns west to a spot I'd picked on a map, specifically because it had nothing near it. No town, no road, no infrastructure of any kind for a mile in every direction. I pulled into a hayfield access road and set up my equipment and sat in my truck watching the spectrum analyzer. The hum was there. Same frequency, same amplitude, same impossible behavior, as if it had no source and no direction and had simply always been present in this air and this ground and all air and all ground, and was just waiting for someone to bring the right instruments to find it. I sat in that hayfield for a long time, 18 years, hundreds of cases. I had found every source. I had solved every case. The work was solvable because sound had rules, and the rules didn't change. And if you were methodical enough and patient enough and ran the right tests in the right sequence, you would find the source. I had run the right tests. I had run them carefully and twice. And every one of them was telling me the same thing, which was that this sound didn't have a source because this sound wasn't traveling through the medium. It was in the medium. All of it, everywhere, already there. I had a longer conversation with Cleo on the 4th evening, sitting in the town hall after everyone else had gone home for the night. I told her what I'd found, and I was honest about what it meant. The hum was real, clearly measurable, and its behavior was unlike anything I'd encountered in 18 years of this work. I told her I needed more time. She asked me what unlike anything I'd encountered meant in practical terms. I told her sound had rules, and this one wasn't following them. She nodded slowly, like this was confirming something she'd suspected rather than surprising her. Then she said there was a detail she'd held back when I arrived because she hadn't wanted to bias my investigation with it before I'd run my initial tests. She asked if I wanted to hear it now. I told her yes. She said the residents who heard the hum most clearly, the ones for whom it had been the most disruptive over the past year or so, had all started describing the same secondary symptom in roughly the last 4 to 5 months. Not pain, not any physical illness. A sensation several of them had independently described using the same word, resonance. A feeling of vibrating at a frequency they weren't generating themselves, most noticeable at night when it was quiet enough to pay attention to. Felt primarily in the chest and skull and along the teeth. Not the hum in the air around them, the hum inside them. I asked if anyone had seen a doctor. She said 3 people had. All 3 had been told there was nothing physically wrong and the sensation was likely stress-related. She said all 3 of those people knew the difference between anxiety and a physical vibration in their sternum, and none of them had found that answer acceptable, but they also hadn't known what else to do with it. Then she mentioned Marta, a retired school teacher in her 70s who lived on the south end of the valley. When Cleo had first started canvassing residents about the hum 14 months ago, Marta had told her she'd been hearing it for over the 20 years, quietly to herself, because the last time she'd mentioned it, about 15 years prior, her doctor had been sufficiently concerned about her mental state that she'd decided it was better to stop bringing it up. I asked if I could talk to Marta. Cleo said she'd already called ahead. Marta's house was at the end of a dirt road, with a garden that had taken over most of the yard, still holding some of its color in the October cold. The kind of garden that tells you someone has been tending it carefully for a long time. Inside the house, there were books on every surface and the specific organization of a person who's lived alone long enough to develop systems. Everything in a particular place for a particular reason. Nothing accidental. She made tea and we sat at her kitchen table and she talked about the hum, the way you talk about something you've long since made a working peace with. Matter of fact, almost affectionate in the way that long familiarity can make even unpleasant things feel like your own. She'd started hearing it in her mid-50s, not loudly at first, a background thing, easy to dismiss. But it had gotten louder over the years, she said, not dramatically, not in a way that would be obvious to anyone who wasn't paying close attention, but measurably, the way a slow leak gets worse if you never address the source. And in the last 2 years, it had changed quality, a word she used deliberately, saying she knew quality was a strange word, but it was the right one. Not louder exactly, she said. Denser, like there was more of it present at the same volume. I asked her about the resonant sensation Cleo had described. She said she'd had it for years, made her peace with it mostly. She said it had taken her a long time to understand that the feeling wasn't arriving from the air around her and passing into her body. It was already in her body. The hum was in her tissue and her bone, and she was vibrating in sympathy with it, she said, the same way a crystal glass vibrates when you hold a musical note near it at the right frequency. Except She hadn't chosen to be near it. She'd just been built with whatever sensitivity made her able to register it, and once she could register it, it had found her, and she'd been part of it ever since, whether she wanted to be or not. She'd been living as part of it for over 2 decades. I asked her if she had any theory about what it was. She was quiet for a moment, looking at her tea. Then she said she wasn't a scientist and her theory probably wasn't worth much. And I told her I'd run out of scientific explanations and I was listening to anything. She said she thought it had always been there, not 14 months, not 20 years. She said she thought it had been there since before the valley, before the ground under the valley, before anything we'd put a name to. She said she thought most people couldn't hear it, and the ones who could were built in some way that nobody had identified, and the ones who could hear it and paid it too much attention eventually stopped being entirely separate from it. She said that last part carefully, watching my face while she said it, and I understood she was telling me something I should take seriously. She asked me if I could hear it. I told her I hadn't noticed it the way the residents described. She nodded and said that was probably for the best and asked if I wanted more tea. I said yes, and we talked for another hour about her garden and the town and the way the valley looked in early November. And she was warm and funny and completely at ease. And the whole time I was sitting there, I was aware of something I hadn't been aware of when I arrived, a feeling I kept trying to identify and kept not quite reaching. Somewhere at the back of my skull, in the cavity of my chest, faint enough to be imagination. I drove back to my rented room and told myself it was imagination. I spent 2 more days in Ardmore running tests. I tried filtering the signal in every way my software allowed, isolating the pure infrasound component and running it through every analytical framework I had access to. I tried cross-correlating it against known geological sources, known industrial frequency profiles, known resonance patterns from large underground structures. No matches. I tested the water in the creek that ran through the middle of the valley, placing a hydrophone in the current and recording for 6 hours. The hum was in the water. Same frequency, same amplitude, same directionlessness. I placed a detector in a sealed container inside a second sealed container and buried it 2 feet in the ground to eliminate any surface transmission pathway. The hum was in the data from that detector too. I had run out of tests, not because I hadn't thought of enough tests, but because I'd reached the end of what tests could tell me. Every new test confirmed the same impossible finding and added nothing that changed it. The hum was present in every medium I could access. It wasn't traveling through any of them. It was inside all of them simultaneously. On my last night in Ardmore, I lay in bed in the farmhouse room I'd been renting, and I faced the thing I'd been not quite facing for 2 days. I could hear it, not the way Marta heard it, not clearly, not as something I could describe with confidence to another person. But it was there in the back of my skull and in my chest cavity, present the way a sound is present when it's been at the edge of your awareness for a long time and you've been actively choosing not to examine it. I'd been choosing not to examine it since the 2nd day, maybe the 1st. I got up and sat at the table with my laptop and my field notes, and I stayed with the data for a long time without trying to do anything with it, not analyzing, just looking at what it was actually saying. The hum was in everything simultaneously, not traveling through things, inside them, the rock and the water and the air and the sealed container I'd buried in the ground, and Marta's chest, and the chest of every resident who'd been describing the resonance and sitting at this table in this farmhouse at 3 a.m, my own chest. I thought about what kind of source could produce a sound that existed inside the medium rather than passing through it. I went back to first principles, set aside everything I knew about conventional acoustics, and started from nothing. The only way a sound could exist inside every medium simultaneously, rather than traveling through them, would be if the medium itself were the instrument. If what was producing the sound were beneath the physical structure of things rather than inside it, beneath the air and the rock and the water and the living tissue, beneath matter in some sense I didn't have clean language for, and the physical world, all of it, everything from bedrock to atmosphere to the calcium in a 70-year-old woman's bones, would be the material it played through. The instrument, not the listener. I sat with that for a long time in that quiet room. The quiet that wasn't entirely quiet. The hum was there. I could hear it. And I understood sitting there in the dark at 3 a.m. that I'd been hearing it for days and hadn't let myself know I was hearing it, and that now I'd let myself know there wasn't a way back to not knowing. I filed my report with the Ardmore Select Board a week after I got home. It documented everything I'd found and was honest about what it meant, which was that the hum's source couldn't be identified because its behavior was inconsistent with every known acoustic source type, and further investigation would require resources and expertise beyond a standard acoustic consulting engagement. I recommended they contact researchers with access to deep geophysical survey data. I didn't put my theory in the report. I didn't know how to put it in a professional document without it being the last professional document I ever filed. I still hear it, not always, not loudly. It's there in quiet rooms and in the fields I park in when I'm setting up equipment on jobs, and in the 20 minutes before sleep when the brain finally stops filling itself with other things. I did what Marta warned me against without knowing she was warning me, which was pay too much attention to it, and it's made a place for itself in me now that I don't know how to empty out. I've thought a lot about the people who've always been able to hear it, not just in Ardmore. The Taos hum in New Mexico, reported by residents since the early 1970s, investigated multiple times, source never conclusively identified. The Bristol hum in England, the Windsor hum along the Ontario-Michigan border, dozens of documented cases across multiple countries going back decades, all describing the same thing. Low, constant, felt in the chest as much as heard, present for some people and absent for others with no clear physiological explanation for the difference. Every investigation had concluded either that the source was some overlooked industrial or geological cause, or that the phenomenon was psychogenic, a stress response, a shared expectation producing a shared sensation. I'd known about all of these cases before Ardmore. I'd considered them explained, or nearly explained, in the way that cases get considered explained when the explanation is good enough to close the file, even if it isn't fully satisfying. I don't consider them explained anymore. I think about the rate of reports. I looked it up after I got back from Ardmore because I needed to know if what I was thinking had any basis outside my own head. documented complaints, the kind that make it into formal records or news coverage or research literature, have been increasing steadily for 30 years, not randomly, not in response to any identifiable increase in industrial activity or population density. The trend is global and it's consistent, and it's not subtle if you look at it across the full time range. More people hearing it, more locations, more of the secondary resonance symptom being described. I think about a note being built toward. I think about something that has been using the physical matter of everything as its instrument since before any of it was solid, since before the planet had a surface to put things on, tuning incrementally toward a pitch it hasn't reached yet. I think about what it means that the tuning seems to be accelerating, that the instrument seems to be getting tighter, the resonance more pronounced, the number of people sensitive enough to feel it from the inside growing. I don't know what happens when it reaches whatever it's building toward. I don't have a framework for that. I don't think the framework exists yet in any language I have access to. I keep doing the work because the work keeps coming, and I'm good at it, and most of what people call me about still has a source I can find. A pipeline, a rooftop HVAC unit creating a standing wave in a building structure, a quarry operation 2 miles away whose blasting schedule lines up exactly with the vibration complaints. I find them and I write my reports, and my clients are satisfied, and I drive home. But I pull up my spectrum analyzer at the start of every new job now as a matter of routine, before I know anything about the site, before I've heard a single complaint described. I set it running and I look at the baseline. And sometimes it's there. Same frequency, same amplitude, the one with no source and no direction and no behavior that agrees with anything. I was taught about how sound works. I see it in the baseline, and I note it, and I keep going, and I don't put it in the report, and I don't tell the client, and I add the location to a private list I've been keeping since I got back from Ardmore. The list has more entries than I'd like. I haven't told anyone what I think it is. Marta kept it to herself for 15 years after the one time she mentioned it and somebody decided she might be coming unraveled. I understand why she made that choice. Some things, once you say them out loud to another person, become their problem too without them having any say in it. They were just nearby when you opened your mouth. I don't want to do that to anyone. But the hum is part of me now, the way it's part of Marta. It's in my tissue, the way it's in the rock and the water and the air, and whatever made it part of me didn't ask and doesn't care, and there's nothing I can do about it now that the threshold's been crossed. I've made something like peace with that. Not acceptance. Something more practical than acceptance. The recognition that fighting it would mean fighting something that's inside my own body. And you can't win a fight where the thing you're fighting and the thing doing the fighting are the same thing. I've held on to one thought that helps. It doesn't know I'm there. It doesn't know any of us are here. It's using us the way it uses the limestone and the river water and the winter air, as material, as part of the instrument it's been playing for longer than the instrument has been solid. We're not the point. We're just in the way of the sound, and being in the way of the sound means the sound goes through us, the same as it goes through everything else. A cello doesn't know the bow is on its strings. That's not a comfortable thought exactly. It's not meant to be, but it's better than the alternative. The alternative is that it does know, that the ones who can hear it from the inside, the martyrs and the growing number of people waking up at 3 in the morning with something vibrating in their chest that isn't their heartbeat, weren't selected randomly. That being built to hear it isn't a quirk of how some ears are shaped or how some nervous systems process infrasound. That's something working at the scale of everything, using all of physical matter as its instrument. Might have reasons for some of the material to be different, to be more conductive, to receive rather than just transmit. I don't stay in that thought. I get in my truck and I drive to the next job and I do the work and I find the sources I can find and I write them up correctly and I come home. The hum comes with me. It's in the truck and the road and the winter fields and the cold air and the dark outside the window and the pillow under my head when I finally sleep. It's been there the whole time. It'll keep being there. And somewhere beneath all of it, beneath the rock it travels through and the air it travels through and the bodies it travels through, something is still tuning, still tightening, still building toward a note it hasn't played yet. I don't know what that note sounds like. I don't know what we sound like when it plays it. I try not to think about that. I don't always succeed.